Hi, I'm Iain and welcome back to the Northland Workshop. This week we are continuing on in our quest to build furniture for this guest bedroom. Last week we started off this adventure by taking a trip down memory lane to just over a year ago, and it detailed the building of the 3-drawer nightstand. Today we're going to start on the first part of a 2-part series that was filmed over 2.5 years ago of building this pine wardrobe. Then, once we conclude that, we will start work on a pine chest of drawers that will replace this bookshelf right here and tie these two pieces of furniture together. So, this is the country pine wardrobe. As you can see, after 2.5 years, it's still holding up just fine. The miters are still tight. We have plenty of storage in here. It's got adjustable shelves, a big area to hang shirts. It's got a 10.5-inch wide drawer for sheets and blankets. And it fits this room quite well. Now I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The secret is this. This piece was never intended to be in this guest bedroom. I messed up. I measured the basement stairs when I was building this thing to make sure I could get it out of the basement, because that would be a bummer. But what I didn't take into account was the stairs to the second story of this house. It's supposed to be on a second floor bedroom. That's what this was built for. It wasn't supposed to be right here. But you won't tell anybody I messed up, will you? To make it like an authentic country style wardrobe, we're going to use pine. And I went to the sawmill and I got some rough sawn pine, just like this. And we're going to go from this to a finished wardrobe in a 2-part series. So this first part will be all about building the carcass of the wardrobe. Part 2 will be about building the doors, the drawer, and doing all the molding on it. The first thing I want to do is cut these boards down to a rough length so that way they're a little bit easier to manage going through the jointer and the planer. And all I did is I drew out a diagram of all the different cuts I want to make on these boards, and I added a couple inches to each one so that way I have a little bit of wiggle room once these things are surfaced to come back and cut them to their final length. Face joining it this way on the jointer does create this ridge all the way down the center, but I'm not too worried about that because it's flat enough that I can run it through the planer and it won't perpetuate the cup, and there's enough thickness to this board that I'll be able to flip it over and plane off any marks left from the jointer. I've set the thickness planer to take a 32nd of an inch off for this first pass, and now what I'll do is put the freshly jointed face of the board down on the table and run each board through, flattening the opposite face. I've now completed laying out where I want the slots for the beechwood biscuits to go. And all the biscuit is is this little football shaped, about an 1/8 inch thick piece of compressed beechwood that, when put in a slot in the glue joint, will help not only reinforce the glue joint, but also help keep these surfaces of the two boards flat when I clamp them together, which will reduce how much sanding I have to do afterwards. Cutting the slots for these biscuits couldn't be easier. Once I have them all laid out on both sides of the joint, all I have to do is grab the piece of wood and my trusty biscuit joiner, and on the nose of the biscuit joiner there's a mark that shows where the center of the little saw blade is. So I line up that mark with the mark on the board and just cut the slot. And it's as easy as that. I'll go down all the boards, everywhere there's a pencil mark, we'll get a slot. I'm just using a little scrap piece of wood to get a nice even coat of glue all the way along this edge of the board that will become one side of the wardrobe. And once I've got the wood glue spread on the edge, I'll go back and spread a little bit in each biscuit groove. I'm applying just enough pressure to hold the glue joints together while the glue sets up. I don't want to crush the wood, I just want to hold it firmly together so I get squeezed out all the way along. The other thing you'll notice is that I've alternated one clamp under the panel, one clamp above the panel, and what that'll do is minimize any bowing that's created when the clamps put pressure on. Well, good morning. I let the sides of the wardrobe sit in the clamps overnight, and now I'm just using my belt sander with some 80 grit sandpaper to smooth up the glue joints and remove any squeezed out glue. This panel is just way too wide and way too long for me to try and cross-cut this thing on the table saw. And I don't really want to have to set up a straight edge for a circular saw on each one of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it on my radial arm saw. And unfortunately, as big as this saw is, it can't completely cross-cut this board either. So what I'll do is I'll cut halfway through, or as far as I can cut with this thing, flip it over, line it back up, and cut through it the rest of the way. With the sides all cut to length, it's time to start cutting all the rabbets and dados that are going to go in the sides to accept the top, bottom, and dividers of the wardrobe. And to do that, I've set up my table saw with a stacked dado head. And all it is a special set of saw blades that is adjustable in width. In this case, I've set it up to 3/4 of an inch because that's what I'm going to use for the dividers. And the very first one I want to cut is the rabbet right at the top of the sides. And because it's a rabbet, I don't want this dado head to hit my saw's aluminum fence, so I've installed the sacrificial fence. Because the side of the wardrobe is almost 7 feet long, I've had to spin the table saw 90 degrees so I have enough space to work, and I've put the outfeed support on the side so that way the side doesn't try to tip. Now all I have to do is keep the top edge of the wardrobe tightly up against the sacrificial fence and carefully push it through the saw, cutting the rabbet. I've taken the time to mark out a notch that I've got to cut in the bottom of each side of the wardrobe, about 1/4 of an inch below where the dado is on the bottom. And the reason for that is this is going to have a piece of molding on the bottom that's going to form like a foot in the corner and have a nice curve to it, and I don't want to see this side behind the baseboard molding, so I need to remove this part where the opening's going to be. And I'll just do that with my jigsaw. Now before I cut this piece right here, this thing's pretty flimsy right now, and I'm afraid when I get near the end it's just going to snap off and it could possibly splinter this thing. So I'm just going to put a spring clamp right there to help hold it while I make the final cut. There. Now I'll just finish up that corner, and this one will be all set. I'm in the process of cutting the holes in the divider that will accept the metal shelf support pins, and that's so I can have adjustable shelves in 1-inch increments. And all I did to cut the holes is I made a jig. The shelf pin drilling guide is a very simple jig to build. All this is a piece of 1/2-inch plywood with a whole series of holes that are 5/8 of an inch in diameter, spaced 1 inch on center. So the center of that hole to that hole is exactly 1 inch. At the end of the guide, I drilled a 1/4 inch hole, 1 inch on center, from this last hole. into which I can insert the shank of a drill bit that's 1/4 inch into the last hole that I've drilled on the workpiece. So that way, if I have to move the jig over because I'm drilling a series of holes that's longer than 2 feet, like I am here, I can index the jig off the last hole I drilled, so that way I know I get a uniform spacing on all the holes. To drill the holes, I'm using my plunge router equipped with a 5/8 inch diameter bushing and a 1/4 inch diameter straight cutting bit. Don't get scared now, but it's time to start assembling everything. So what I'll do is put a bead of glue in the middle dado, because the middle seems like a good place to start. And then simply make sure the front is lined up flush. And once it's in, I'll make sure it's square to the side, and then just toenail it in place with some 1¼ inch brads. Okay, I'm spreading glue in the 2 dados. They'll accept the spacer, and because I'm working alone, this is going to get interesting. So I thought I would cheat and clamp these 2 scrap cutoffs flush with the bottom of the dado in the front, so that way I've got a little extra help holding this thing in place while I try to fish it into that dado. And if I can get it started in the back, that one's started. That one's started. I'm screwing this partition in with 1¼ inch drywall screws because nobody's going to see the top of this thing, and I want to make sure that this doesn't pull apart when I wrestle the other side on this thing. So these screws are basically just mini clamps until the glue sets. And nobody's ever going to see down where this drawer is. So, more drywall screws. This is where things get interesting. I got started today cutting all the face frame pieces to size for the wardrobe, and I decided the best way to join them all together would be with pocket screws. Drilling the holes for pocket hole screws is really simple. You only need a couple things. You need a jig and you need the stepped drill bit. And the stepped drill bit is just a 3/8 drill bit that then steps down to an 1/8 of an inch drill bit near the end. The 1/8 of an inch drill bit is the pilot hole for the screw. The wide part of the drill bit cuts the actual pocket that recesses the screw head. Now, you have to drill it into the wood at a specific angle, and it's very easy to do that with a pocket hole jig. And all the pocket hole jig is a piece of plastic with a metal bushing in it that holds it at the correct angle that when you guide it in, you get a pocket and a pilot hole for the screw. So to make the hole for the pocket hole screw, all I do is, this is the back side of the face frame, because I don't want to see these things from the front of the wardrobe, is I figure out where I want the screw hole, and I line up the little jig with the edge of the board for a 3/4 inch wide board, and clamp it down with a little quick clamp, and then I just drill into it until it bottoms out on the stop. It doesn't get any easier than that. Pocket hole screws make assembling the face frame very fast and very easy. First thing I do is put a bead of glue on the end of the board, put it in place, and then you want to clamp it so the faces stay flush. There. No waiting for glue to set up. You can move on to the next joint. With the face frame installed, I'm left with this corner that I'd kind of like to reinforce. So I took a 2x4 and ripped the glue block out of it, and I'm just going to put some wood glue on both sides, put it up in there, and then hold it in place with a couple drywall screws until the glue sets up. And now the support for the back leg, again made out of a partial 2x4. That'll get held in place with some pocket hole screws until the glue sets. I'm currently using a router with a flush trim bit to trim the face frame of the wardrobe flush with the sides of the wardrobe. And that'll save me a lot of sanding in the future.